whether something is whether a piece of information is new or something that they've already considered and is part of their the way that they constructed their vote preference. Unmarried women are likely to be inundated with Democratic messaging, very unlikely to receive Republican messaging. So it's likely they've heard very little negative about Democrats in regard to abortion, and a lot of negative information about Republicans. But you can see here, just testing a message and looking at the demographic impacts, you can find out a lot more about what is the most effective targeting procedure, what the most effective message is. So we don't just run randomized controlled trials. We could stop there and just pick the best message. But digging down, targeting more precisely, you're going to increase your efficiency and effectiveness a lot. The way that we approach this is we train a machine learning algorithm to predict support across all voters for all voters in the state. So using the control and the treatment group, we predict baseline from the control group using a large number of variables on the voter file and consumer data that we have about each of the survey respondents. We predict what we estimate their likely Republican support would be in the control group, and then we do the same for the treatment group for every registered voter in the state. Doing that, then we can compare those two and see which voters are most likely to move in response to the messaging. And we can pull those people out, identify the best persuasion targets to deliver to our clients, who then execute that messaging campaign and attempt to persuade those voters. So we're basically pulling out the most likely prospects. So why is this important? Probably seems pretty straightforward, but if you go through some numbers of an example campaign, say you have a $1 million budget, 500,000 targets, $2 per contact, and you want to try to persuade the most people to vote for Republican that you can. And say, like we found in our abortion messaging, the overall general treatment effect is about 1.5 points if you just go in blind. That will net you about 7,500 new votes for $133 per vote. Now say we go with the best message, that's plus 3 points. But we're still not really targeting people, or at least not very precisely, which is difficult to do based on broad demographics. We double the votes to 15,000, halve the cost, $67 per vote. If we add machine learning, so that prediction and identification of the best persuasion targets, we could double it again to 6 points. Now we're talking about 30,000 votes instead of 7,500, $33 per vote instead of 133. So a massive increase in efficiency and effectiveness. We didn't just do the pre-testing to identify the persuasion targets and the best messaging. We actually ran a randomized controlled field trial in North Carolina and Wisconsin based on this data. So we took the targets, the best persuasion targets that we delivered to the client, and we randomly, we pulled out a random control group from that. So people that we otherwise would have targeted, but we pulled them out to have a baseline of people, targets who did not receive messaging, and then we had everyone else that did receive the messaging. So our expected impact was about 1.5 points if we didn't do this persuasion targeting. And we found that the vote impact among the targets that we identified as being persuadable was actually much, much higher, 6.5 points in North Carolina and about 7 points in Wisconsin. So you can see a huge increase there in the field in a real world campaign in 2022. And again, huge increase in efficiency and effectiveness, and just being able to leverage the impact of every dollar makes a huge difference to the outcome of a race. Let's see here. the I can get into. I'm trying to find Zoom again here if I can. Here we go. Stop share. There we go. The efficiency differences are massive, and I think it's a huge problem on our side. We're I believe the only firm that does precisely what we do on the Republican side, the conservative side of the spectrum. There are a huge number of Democratic firms that conduct this kind of work, and I think a large reason for that is simply the liberal bias of academia. There are a lot of people in social science and in political science that go back and forth between campaigns and organizations and the progressive ecosystem, and have really spread this methodology and this approach to testing messages and targeting voters. And I think it's really starting to have a cumulative impact compared to where we are pursuing, a lot of the standard approaches from the past, focus groups, surveys asking respondents whether they think a message is effective or not. And you can just see by those numbers that we presented there that the efficiency gains are tremendous, and especially in an age, I think, where Republicans have a more difficult time fundraising in terms of smaller dollar donors, online and text donation is much greater on the Democratic side than the Republican side. So we really need to make every dollar work for us, and we're simply not doing that at scale right now. I think I'd love to turn it over to some interaction and questions, discussion, if you'd like. I could also show you what a survey experiment actually looks like, if you think that would be of interest.
Yeah, I do. I would like to see that, Adam. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So let's, I'll share my screen again. And one second here.
I think you're still the host, right? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can you see this, Lisa?
Wisconsin Opinion Project. Yep.
Yep. And I've turned off the validation here, but pretty straightforward survey to start off with, going through some basic demographic questions, party ID, presidential vote, and then we get to this point in the survey, and after this point, it's going to diverge just for in terms of what the respondent sees on their phone or their desktop. This is where we present the messaging. In this case, they've gotten one of the treatment messages attacking Democrat for being extreme on abortion issues. We also test videos as well as text. We ask people whether they've seen or heard a message like this recently. One of the things we want to do is make sure that people, to the greatest extent possible, don't feel like we want a particular answer from them. So we present these messages simply as something that might have popped up in their area recently. Have you ever heard this messaging? We don't want them to think that we want them to change their mind or to create any kind of reaction on their part. Just present the messaging. And then people answer vote choice question here. And then some policy questions thereafter. We have additional demographic information that we ask at the end of the survey. But if I go back to the bookmark here and see if we get a different message. Yeah, this is a Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, which I think was different than the last one. If we go back again, see if we can get a control. message as well. So I'm just going through here and kind of trying to reset. And this is the placebo. It's about local parks. So I was just going back to before the randomization. And as you can see here now, this person who entered the survey would have gotten the placebo instead of one of the treatment messages. And then everything else is going to be the same in terms of the questions following the treatment or the placebo message.
Interesting. So, but you and everybody else, we're going to open it up for questions. But I have a question because we're involved with a couple of different campaigns, and obviously fundraising is always a problem, particularly on the right side of the aisle. How you mentioned that when you were talking, Adam, how do you work to help candidates or organizations raise money through kind of predictive behavior like that?
We've done a little bit of work on this. Our bread and butter is persuasion testing, but the same principle applies to fundraising. You have a hard outcome, which is conversion to a donor.
Right.
So we can run randomized controlled trials testing different messages to donors, different scheduling. In other words, how often do we contact them in addition to the messaging? We can test timing, time of the day. And then once we have that data, we can feed that back in and try to refine the targeting in terms of new donors. So use statewide voter files to try to find people who are likely to convert to a donor as well, just as we would identify persuasion targets, people who are most likely to respond in a positive direction to a message.
Well, that's really interesting. So, but you need a pretty big voter file in order to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, and we work with the full state voter files all the time, so that's not a huge problem. Okay. It would be more just that upfront investment in terms of if you're, texting a large enough number of people that we would have enough donations made to be able to make some improvements in terms of the targeting. Obviously, conversion rates are pretty small unless it's a really good list that's very specific and kind of known vetted donors. One of the big problems I think on our side, and just in general in terms of fundraising, is people pass around the same lists. They get overused. These are people who do donate, so it's valuable, but I think there's decreasing returns there. What we really need is an expansion of the donor base, not just trying to squeeze out more money from existing known donors. And that also runs a risk of overloading people and making them upset if they get too many text messages or emails or phone calls. I know that's becoming a big problem in politics in general, and it seems on the right in particular.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So one of the places where Adam and Klaus and I tried to start was because we have our relational organizing app, which is all about relationships and motivating people to get involved and motivating people to talk to their friends and families. That's actually when we started talking to Adam, and we had we were this close to doing a trial with the Never Back Down DeSantis team, and then things got heated up on the campaign, and they said we can't take any risks, so we can't do it. But we're teeing up with another one because would you say behavioral science is really important when you start thinking about relational organizing and friends talking to friends and how we can get more people involved? To me, that is so much behavioral science, but you're the scientist. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, it has been shown in experiments that hearing from somebody that you trust at some level is much more powerful than hearing from a
Right.
stranger or some unknown, messenger. Who it comes from matters a lot. So if we can harness that, it's just going to amplify the effectiveness of any kind of message or information that you're trying to deliver. There's you lower the resistance of somebody to actually processing that information instead of just rejecting it outright. So it's a very powerful tool.
Well, we're involved in a project now down in Georgia that I do want to talk to you about later this afternoon. Anybody else have any questions? I still have a few for Adam if nobody else wants to raise a hand and ask any questions, but we're happy to. Yeah, Stan,
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
And Adam, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
All right. So, I'm in Minnesota, and our House, Senate, and the governorship are all controlled by the Democrats. It's been a disaster for us. And our House is up for election this fall, and we're working hard to try and regain the majority in the House. And in our congressional district, we have about 4 House districts that we are targeting as perhaps the most likely that we could flip from Democrat to Republican. We have done a survey in those 4 districts to find out we surveyed this. We're very unscientific, but we surveyed what we in our database Buzz 360 defined as swing voters, and we tried to go from 18 to 45. And since we're a purple, maybe even a blue district, suburban, we're trying to figure out how we can get a message out to swing voters that would allow those in the middle maybe to come to the Republican side. And we've identified as the top issues household budgets, public safety, and K-12 education. And now we, in our own unscientific way, are trying to figure out what I would call black hat messages, the negative stuff that we, as the political unit, would throw out there on social media. And then we're trying to identify white hat messages that would appeal to voters on these important issues. If time and money were no object, how would we more scientifically achieve success by working with your firm? I just, who hires you, and how much time does it take? How much money does it take? And with what I've described to you, is that kind of the stuff that you try to do, is to help frame a message that will convince a swing voter to come to our side of the aisle?
Yes, that is what we do. I think straightforward surveys, focus groups are of tremendous value in terms of just getting a lay of the land, generating ideas, especially with focus groups or surveys. Just making sure that you know what a baseline is in terms of people's perspectives. And what we do is we would work with. We usually work with clients, typically independent expenditure organizations, so PACs. We have done a little bit of work with party-related organizations and campaigns, but the PACs tend to be what we work with most. And typically, we'll take kind of material that they've been playing around with, things that they're interested in. Oftentimes, we're working with an organization that has a particular issue set that they're already focused on, so they're kind of constrained in that way. And we work with them to craft usually around 3 messages to test that have distinct variations in terms of how the message is framed, how the issue is framed, and so we have clear, distinct differences between those messages to try to tease out which framing seems to be the most effective, or if they're all effective, and you can choose among them or use all of them. And so it's definitely something we can and do. We can do down to the congressional district. The numbers start getting limited there in terms of how many respondents we can get. If it's 3 or 4 districts, and there's not not any particular reason a priori to think that one is drastically different in terms of a super popular, well-known incumbent or a problematic challenger, whatever it might be. We can pool those together and treat them as one, and run the experiment across the districts to see what's resonating, broadly speaking, and then also identify persuasion targets to use in the field to deliver those messages after the fact. And again, we test, video, fully produced ads. We can do audio alone, text. A lot of times we do upstream kind of text experiments before people get to the video production stage, because we can tease out what frames are looking promising in terms of moving forward with the investment in those final ads.
Okay, cool. Christy, you have a question for Adam. You want to unmute yourself and just ask him a question? There you go. I can't hear you, Christy. Do you? Maybe you want to work on the audio there. In the meantime,
Try that. Can you get us now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. New computer. Question is, we're a non-registered state, so we have a very difficult time getting data on independents, light blues, and dark blues. We have great lists for Republicans, but we don't have the other ones. And we're helping in a campaign that we lost 60-40. We can talk to the 40 all we want, but it's not going to win the race. So we've got to go to the middle, and we've got to find these people. And I guess it's kind of a database question, but when you come to a state like ours, how challenging is it to get that data and get it? And then I have a follow-up about something about size and then reversing on something. So if you can answer that one, I got another question after that.
I'm sorry, I missed what state you said you're
Minnesota.
in? Oh, okay.
Minnesota.
And you're essentially asking how you would find middle of the road or independent leaning.
Right. We don't roster like many states. Mm-hmm. And register. We have no registered Republicans or registered Democrats like most states. Right. So our databases that we work with as Republicans are Republicans. Mm-hmm. And now we have to go back and try to go find the middle and the light blues. Well, they're mm-hmm. not on our data.
Right. It makes it more challenging in terms of getting, good predictions in terms of people's likely party identification. But we do model based on survey responses and other demographic information. So which way somebody is likely to lean, even if they're not registered or haven't voted in a state primary for a particular party. So we have all the voter file information that is available in each state, which is pretty extensive. And then it's also augmented with a large number of consumer variables. So it'll have things about like estimated home value and how likely they are to be married or have children, like hundreds of variables that we whittle down to ones that are most useful in our predictions. And that can get us a long way toward identifying people who we think are very likely Republican or Democrat, and then people who we're uncertain about. The people that we're uncertain about in terms of their party identification, it's not always a great guide to whether they'll be persuadable or not. So obviously somebody that is voted, every election in a party primary for 10 years, probably not persuadable. But outside of that, there's a lot of variation, and we're looking for about 10% of the population or there around that is cross-pressured, that maybe they identify with one party or the other, but they're a little torn, and they're susceptible to persuasion. They're odd people. They're not like us. They're not, anyone that's invested in politics is a strange person compared to the normal American. They're just not that invested. And even among voters, the people that are probably going to be most persuadable are going to be even less invested and less knowledgeable, and more conflicted. So they might be with the Democrats on abortion, but really hate them on some economic issues or some cultural issues that are not related to abortion, or vice versa. And finding those people, the most effective way of doing that is not looking necessarily at how likely they are to identify with one party or the other, but through the randomized controlled trial, testing a message to see if they look like a person who is likely to shift or be persuaded.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that can be a mix of demographics and a mix of characteristics that aren't necessarily obvious beforehand. The unmarried women example that I gave in the presentation, we found that pop up in a number of different contexts in terms of our research, not just on the abortion issue, but we did extensive testing across 6 or 7 states as well, testing messages regarding transgender issues and some parental rights issues, and found that unmarried women there again seem to be responding the best to the messaging, which you wouldn't necessarily think just look, the way that demographic votes and how political operatives kind of perceive that demographic as being a lock for Democrats.
Yeah, interesting. So we have a couple more questions here. Carol is asking, and Carol, if you want to just unmute yourself, you can ask the question, but she's asking how quickly can a test message experiment be run and the audience honed?
Yeah, if the messages are set to go, we can turn around the testing pretty quickly. Around a week, generally speaking, we can accelerate that if need be. And then, about another half week to a week for the persuasion targets to be delivered.
Okay, cool.
So about a week or two.
A week or two. That's a good turnaround.
No, thanks.
That's really good. Tara, you have a little bit more of a lengthy question. If you want to unmute yourself from Arizona about ballot chase, I would love to hear your question.
Hi, thank you very much for everything you're doing. I'm in Arizona, and we obviously just recently, we have a Democratic governor, and we do have a very small majority Republican legislature. So we have held our Republican governor at bay a little bit from her extreme policies, although it's very tenuous. Our big challenge this year is abortion, just as the gentleman spoke earlier from Minnesota. They're certainly inundating every day with ads on abortion. And I've been heavily invested in ballot chasing. And that's really my interest right now to hopefully win. I'm working with American Majority. And I think what my concern is, we had 350,000 registered Republicans in 2022 leave their ballots not turned in. They didn't vote for whatever reason. So we're strictly going after them, and also low propensity voters. My question is, what tools for persuasion do you find that work with Republicans that still prefer day of voting?
We haven't done any testing on that, but it's a really good question. And I know it seems like it's becoming more and more of a concern among state parties and campaigns that everything that happened in 2020 in terms of the pandemic and the huge expansion of vote by mail and all the interference in terms of the Zuckerberg money in terms of election offices and Trump's statements about the election and fraud and everything. It just seems to have really penetrated in terms of something that Republicans distrust on a deep level. I think it would be great to test messaging on that front and see what makes them more comfortable with it again and be able to separate out what the Democrats were doing in some states in particular in terms of manipulating and in utilizing in unfair ways the balloting process versus just turning something in and being confident that will get counted if they turn in a ballot beforehand versus showing up on the day of. But I don't know, off the top of my head. We haven't done any research on it, but I think it is something that we could find better messaging for, and is important to kind of reverse and start getting people more comfortable with that process.
Yes.
One of the organizations we worked with in Pennsylvania actually had kind of run a test that they were trying to get people to vote early, and they had a pretty big audience, and the result was people didn't vote early, but they had a much higher turnout on election day.
Hmm.
It would be interesting to know how they did that and what that message was, that it had almost the reverse effect on what they were trying to do. Be interesting. What other questions does anybody else have? Tara, did that answer your question about the ballot chase? I'm going to talk a little bit about ballot chase when it's in just a minute here too.
It did. I find that really interesting what you spoke about as well. I find that when I make calls, just my experience, when I make calls to try to encourage people about ballot chase and using Florida as the example of why it wins, it's interesting. A lot of people will respond back to me that no matter what, they are going to vote, but still prefer day of vote. So I see what you're saying. I can see them literally. Maybe it's just the encouragement of reminding people to vote, and they get very excited about it in that point of the call. I hope that it does turn to fruition, that they do show up day of.
Yeah, it was really interesting because they had quite a big audience, so they were excited about the results actually. Is there any more questions for Adam? Because I want to spend a few minutes. Adam, I found a video that I want to show, and I'd love your opinion after I show it. But if anybody has more questions for Adam, we certainly can take them now. Otherwise, I'm going to take back the host and show you the video. My company Buzz 360 had been invited to present at one of the rural caucuses, the legislators from the rural parts of our state. And so I was researching a bit on, what the Democrats are doing, because I know their strategy is to take over the rural areas because they've kind of, lassoed a lot of the metros. And so this video I found when I was going to be presenting to this rural caucus. So I did want to kind of, I wanted to play that, and then of course talk a little bit about ballot chase and swipe red. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to start this and hopefully it will play here. Come on. Oh no. Where is the video? Yeah, I did, and it's not coming on. Oh, shoot. Well, okay. It was a really good video because the Democrats put it out talking about why they wanted to, why it's important for the people in the rural community to vote Democrat. And if I get it back on, I can show it later. But if nobody else has any other questions about it for Adam, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Buzz 360 and what we do. Well, those of you who don't know, we are headquartered in Minnesota. We are an approved vendor with the RNC. We currently are selling in about 18 different states, and that race from across the gamut of presidential all the way to school board candidates or who uses our product. As an approved vendor, and this is important because when you were talking about, and Christy, you were talking about the people here in Minnesota not having enough data, we have, as an RNC approved vendor, we have access to all the data. So we've had to go through a lot of cybersecurity, all kinds of information. And for ballot chase, we get the ABEV file daily. So this is our platform. This is all the features that we have in our platform, which we sell a lot of this product. And then we have the Swipe Red, which is the relational organizing. And this is where we actually met Adam, and we're talking to him about doing a project for the DeSantis team. Because relational organizing is really all about driving, what really drives people to show up for the election, and then really what keeps them involved going forward. And of course, we believe that it's all personal. And so if you're influenced by your friends, you're much more likely to stay involved if your friends are involved, and we share those same values. So the strategy is really all around mobilizing volunteers and staff to connect with their personal networks and have conversations and talk about what's really important to them. And here's some studies, and this is one of the reasons we want to find a good one for Adam to get involved, and because of the very middle one here, Columbia University did a very large study of relational organizing compared to other traditional ways of reaching out to voters, and what they found is that people that were contacted by friends are 8.3 percentage points more likely to get out to vote. Now that's a huge number. And when you're talking about, small margins, if we lose by a small margin, that's a huge number. The left is, we know that there's a bias for big tech. We know that there's a bias for social media. So when you have friends talking to friends, it's much more powerful. And the increased likelihood of getting involved in an organization or even doing a poll or a petition, they're 8 times more likely of somebody that they know has asked them. So these are some of the statistics that we talk about every single day. And it's 10 times more likely that you can have a conversation with somebody on using relational organizing than door knocking, 10 times. And calls are 8 times more likely, the higher, if somebody's going to pick up the phone and talk to you, if it's a friend calling. We were on the DeSantis team, and I think if some of you have been on these before, it's worth going over this again, because in Iowa, the counties, there is 99, I think it was 99 counties and 1,600 precincts. And we deployed Swipe Red across 265 precincts in Iowa. And in those precincts that Swipe Red was deployed, or relational organizing was deployed, DeSantis performed 25% better than the precincts that were not using relational organizing. And he also performed 40 times better against the polls in those precincts. So, those are really good numbers, and we were super excited because in a company like ours, we need to do analysis after a campaign to see what's going right, what can we do different. And so this was very exciting to us, that because everything was the same. They had professional door knockers, they had, volunteer door knocking, they had phone calling, but in those precincts where Swipe Red was deployed, it was a very, very positive outcome for DeSantis. Tara, you were talking about ballot chase. This is a new piece of functionality that we unveiled right before the election in 2023 and was used as in kind of a beta format in Virginia and Colorado. And really it's all about, having a dynamic audience that, people are requesting a ballot. So the ballot is mailed to them, and then they're returning the ballot or voting early. So that's the dynamic audience that's included. Now, the thing that Adam's talking about, persuasion, how are we going to get people out to vote? How are we going to get them to return the ballot? These are things that are really important to all of us when we start talking about ballot chase. And then, of course, chasing the ballot. Because we're an RNC approved vendor, we have all that information. We know who their voter frequency. We can cut and slice and dice the data very narrowly to get just the right voters. and then we start chasing. So we have something called a trigger. So we get a daily file from the RNC saying, okay, this day, so many people requested a ballot. And then the next day, they return their ballot. And this is happening dynamically because of our audiences are dynamic. So you can set it up one time, you set up this trigger, and when somebody requests a ballot, it puts a tag on them that they requested a ballot. Once they return the ballot, it removes that tag automatically. So that's happening every single day when we get the voter file from the Secretary of State RNC, that's happening every single day. And so those are building dynamically, and you can even set a message out for those people that have, because we have those things like swipe red, friends helping friends vote. Hey, did you return your ballot? Because we have an audience, we know who didn't, right? And so they can have a friend reaching out to a friend, asking if they want to return their ballot. Can even have a neighborhood gathering and say, let's bring a ballot and a beverage and let's all vote together. So those are some of the things that you can do with that data and the tools that can help you. There's all kinds of different messages. I could talk all day about this, but I'm not going to. But we can have text messaging, broadcast email, and of course, friend to friend. And in Fairfax County, you see, this is what happened in Fairfax, and this was in 2023. So you can see that the blue line is the voters, right? They were returning their ballot. And as soon as they were returning their ballot, the costs were going down dramatically because they didn't have to reach out to those voters again. So that's what happened in Fairfax when we were testing this out. We came out with it like in October of 2023, and we were super excited about those results. That's my phone number. The other thing, Adam, I don't know if you're still on, I'd have to look. If you could put your contact information in the chat so everybody can get a hold of you, that would be great.
Sure.
You did?
To that screen.
Okay, my trusted colleague here is saying that I can now show the video. Let's see how we do it.
Okay, there's over there, all the way on the right, in this line here. You can see it right now, there.
Share?
No, down below, unlock, there on.
Enable content,
And now you
okay.
go.
Okay, here's the video I wanted to show everybody because I think this is super interesting and very powerful.
They are the forgotten places. From the dirt roads of the Delta to the hills and hollers of Appalachia. They are the back roads, bayous, and small towns in every part of America. These places are not forgotten by those who live here or by those who are from here, but by some in Washington who say they are unwinnable. Because the politics here and the voters here can be as red as the dirt. But to win, or even to make inroads down these back roads, we must show up. If Democrats did just 5% better in rural areas, it would transform the political landscape across America. And that's what Dirt Road Democrats is all about. Taking on the tough races, organizing, and teaming up with candidates and state parties to take the fight to every part of our country, even the parts the so-called experts say we can't win. We will do what is hard, put in the time, and make sure the work goes on to protect democracy. Elect leaders who will bring us together and restore a belief in the promise of America, in the forgotten places, and everywhere in between.
Well, what does everybody think? I think that's extremely powerful. Adam, you're the expert and you're still on, so I want to ask you, what do you think?
Sure. So it seems to be an ad that's targeting Democratic operatives and donors. And I think it is powerful in that regard. I also think it's hitting on something that we think about a lot, which is a lot of times, the most potential is in an area where you're doing the worst, right? If it's a demographic that's already with you overwhelmingly, then and is something that is a focus of your party outreach, it's likely you don't have a lot left to squeeze out of that. Whereas demographics that are kind of ignored by one party, they're likely not getting information to counter what they're getting from the other side. And I think that's what they're getting at here. You don't have to win a demographic to have a huge impact on the outcome of an election. As I said, if you're losing 60-40 and you bump that up to 45% or 50% even, and that can have a huge impact on the outcome of an election. So I think my example of unmarried women, 2-to-1 Democrat voting, but there's a lot of potential voters there. We're still going to lose that demographic, but if you can shift 5%, that could be the difference between winning and losing. And a lot of times could be much more efficient and effective than going after a group that's already with you and trying to squeeze out more voters from it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Everybody, I really appreciate you being on today. You can see in the chat, Adam's put his contact information, his phone number, and his email address. If you are thinking about a project that might be useful, reach out to him. Eric, I see you have a question. Why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. My question, I just saw Selena Zeta just 5 minutes before the Zoom started, and hopefully she's a household name, but she writes for the Washington Examiner against me, among maybe other news carriers, but I heard her on the radio numerous times in the 2016 campaign and just saying how she drove, I'm from Pennsylvania originally, and how they say, you got Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and about 300 miles of Alabama in between. And she just said the enthusiasm for Trump in the heartland of Pennsylvania in the Alabama sections was enormous, and she basically predicted a victory there. So I think the dirt road Democrats are going to get a little bit of a surprise, but not that we should be complacent, but that's another side of that coin.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Any other questions before we get off and we let Adam go? And
I have one.
Lisa,
yeah,
I've got a question. This is Owen Michelson. I am a candidate in a blue district for House here in Minnesota. And just very high level, Adam, what do you sell? Do you sell services to local House campaigns, Senate campaigns, or is this sort of background information that you have information that we can subscribe to? So conceptually, this is all very interesting. Is there a service that you provide? I know Lisa and Klaus, I'm working with them, but do you have a service?
So our service is typically running experiments for a particular organization, for a particular state, and that would include candidates, campaigns. I mentioned earlier, most of our work is for PACs, independent expenditure organizations, but we have done work with campaigns. Essentially the same approach. So testing messages, for persuasion. We can really test most anything in terms of, as Lisa mentioned, trying to test what works best in terms of driving people to certain actions, driving them to reach out to other people through their platform, et cetera. or turnout experiments, that kind of thing. Turnout experiments tend to be helpful for the next election since the election is over. But yes, so our services primarily message testing, delivery of persuasion targets or other targets, or optimizing particular tactics that you're involved in.
Okay, sounds great. You answered my question. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank
I have
you.
a similar question or related question. How much does it cost for like a small candidate with a low budget to like send you a lit piece and have you test it, or send you a video and have you test it?
It does depend what we're doing in terms of the standard message testing. Baseline around 50 grand.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No,
it's expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
The video pointed out, that the left keeps punching on this save democracy, save our democracy. And we all know that, democracy is mob rule, but we have a constitutional republic. How can we contend with that, that little subtle gaslighting that they do relentlessly?
I think that's a long answer. Adam, if you have a quick thought there, we can take it. Otherwise, we are over our time.
Well, I would just say, it's a long road, political change. It can happen quickly if something, a major event or political personality comes along, obviously. But otherwise, it's just cycle after cycle of kind of chipping away at it and trying to get better each time and trying to maximize our gains in each election.
Maybe we could have people, organize better to, hit an onslaught of editorials around the country about what a republic is versus a democracy, and how historically those have worked and not worked. And I don't know, there's one idea, we can just hit them back.
Yeah.
Well, very good, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate you jumping on. And Adam, thank you very much for your time today. It was very informative. I'm getting a lot of people in the chat saying it was very good. So thank you very much. Talk again soon. Everybody check out Buzz360 at buzz360.co. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.